Welcome everybody. Alright, now there's a couple things that we need to talk about. First of all, we need to talk about what you need to do for the course, and second of all, I'm going to talk about the format of my specific courses. So the first thing that we need to talk about is you need to go to jsbin.com. It's a free service, and what jsbin.com does is it renders the code as you type. Alright, that's pretty much what it does, and it's a very awesome tool to learn and to prototype later on with this code here. And as you can see, it has HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you can just essentially put all of these into one, and you can code and see the results on the fly instead of rendering it, etc. Now, the other thing that you also need is I highly recommend that you use Google Chrome. The reason for this is that Google Chrome is the best browser in terms of compatibility. Most other browsers aren't as good as Chrome, so I highly recommend that you use Chrome. And if you're on anything before Internet Explorer 9, I highly recommend that you just go and download Chrome. And if you're on Internet Explorer 9, again, download Chrome. If you're going to use any browser, I suggest using Internet Explorer 9, Firefox, or Chrome. Safari's alright as well. Now, the stuff that we're going to be doing here isn't that advanced. However, if I do something and I type something and the result comes up differently, chances are it's your browser. And so if it comes up differently and you're, let's say, an Internet Explorer 6 or 7, and that's probably why. So it's best that you use Chrome. So, hopefully you're on JSBin now, and what I've done here is I've closed off the CSS tab, and you can do that just by clicking it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about why CSS was invented and what we mainly use it for. On another note, usually I like to talk a little bit about my development faux pas and what I've noticed when I've been developing too, and sometimes I'll give a little bit of tidbit of information. So those tidbits of information are really important, and they're usually traps or mistakes that I've made that I don't want you to make. All right, so let's talk a little bit about HTML. So HTML, if you've taken the HTML course, you know that it stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which means that the HTML, what it does is it displays things on websites. So it puts in the text, the images, and it sets up some limited functionality like links and tables and lists, etc. So what it does is that at a very simple level, HTML displays everything. It sets up the framework. Now, in order to make it look better and to make it look more stylized, you need CSS. Now, in HTML, there are style tags, which I will talk a little bit about, and I'll show you a little bit about how they work. And what we do with these style points and properties is that in CSS, we take those style points and move it to a completely different file. So why would you move something from one file to another? And the reason is that even a few lines of code looks really complicated, and I'll show you this in just a second here. So a few lines of code look a little bit complicated, and when you take that code and move it to another file, it simplifies things down. A lot of beginner programmers, they end up putting things in one file, and all of a sudden you have like a 100-page code file, and it looks horrendous, right? And in fact, when I was making an Xbox game, and I did release an Xbox game a few years ago, before I released it, everything was in one file, and you know, I had to take it out, and it was actually hindering development. So I had this huge, I'd say probably about 100 pages actually of code, and what I did is I took everything out and I moved it to different files, and it looked way better, and it did speed up development, and I learned my lesson that time. So CSS, again, it takes all of the styling pressure away from the HTML document and puts it right in the CSS document. The same thing can be said with JavaScript. Now JavaScript adds in functionality. So HTML displays it, CSS designs it, and JavaScript adds functionality. So if you want to add like computing power like calculator or something like that, you need to use JavaScript. JavaScript is not to be confused with Java. Those are two different things. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these style points here. So there's going to be a couple things that we need to do. So we need to type in some HTML. So I'm going to type in a header 1, and I'm just going to call this header 1. Okay, simple enough. And remember, you always need to close off the tag here. And the last time I'll mention this, but if you haven't taken the HTML tutorial series, I highly recommend that you do it. All right, so the paragraph here, we can say, this is awesome, maybe a few exclamation points, and of course we need to close that off. Okay, now you can stylize anything here, and the way we do that is we just type in style equals, okay, and 2 quotes, and you can say color orange, like that, semicolon, and you can go background color, and you need a dash there, and then you can say black, you know, and you can go font family, and you can say courier, okay, and you can see that instantly this is just 3 different properties here, and you can also do something like font size, and we'll make it 50 pixels, okay, and you can see it's a lot bigger now. Okay, so if we do the same thing with the paragraph tag, and we can go style, again, equals, and by the way, you should be typing this out while I do this. Programming is, if you want to get good at programming, you have to do it. It's not something you can just sit around and listen to and get better. It is a, you have to physically do it. It's like sports or music. Or art or something like that. Those are probably the closest things that I can imagine to. You can't become a championship weightlifter by cramming. You can't do it by thinking about weightlifting. You have to actually do it, right? Or if you want to become, you know, a good, you know, soccer or football player, depending on where you are in the world, you have to actually go and play. Well, with programming, you actually have to physically type in code. So I highly recommend just typing everything that I'm doing here. It gets you into practice, okay? So we can go ahead and put color, and then we can give this a cool color like, let's give it a blue color, semicolon. We can go background color, and you can put these into any order, by the way. Let's give it orange. Yeah, that looks kind of cool. We can go font family. We'll give it Arial. All right, something simple. All right, so let's make it impact, because I like impact. All right, so let's open up our CSS file here. So the way that this works in CSS is that you take everything by the tag and you go ahead and style it. So what we need to do here is we need to style the H1 style. We need to color it orange. We need to give the background color black. We need to give the font family of courier, and we also need the size of 50 pixels. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to type in the header tag, and you'll also notice that JSBin conveniently colors in certain lines of code, and the reason why it does this is that it makes it easier to look at. So color-coded code is a lot better. Now the next thing you need to do is add in 2 curly braces, and if you added 1 curly brace, what ends up happening is that the other one, when you push enter, automatically happens. Now, this curly brace is a very important concept in a lot of programming. Now, CSS and HTML weren't the first programming languages invented. I mean, most of the programming languages, you know, something like C, COBOL, all those programming languages have kind of a history. And one of the things that you learn is that this curly brace sets up a block of code. So in other programming languages, you have something called a function, and in a function, what it does is you need to set it up with these 2 lines of code, and anything within that function, so if you call it to, let's say, print text, you call that function to print text, anything within that function will get called, and 2 curly braces are what we use to do that. So anything within these 2 curly braces is going to be applied to header 1 here. So the first thing we need to do in CSS is essentially, all we need to do is type in the style points here. So the color is pretty simple. You don't need to put quotes or anything like that. And we just, in this case, it's orange. Okay, and you need a semicolon. And again, going back to older programming languages, the way a computer reads any program is that it reads it line by line and then it renders it. In this case, And in most cases, a semicolon says that that line is finished, okay? We need to go into the next command. So you have one command, semicolon, finished, okay? The next thing we need to do is we need to type in the background color, and you just type in background color, okay? A colon again, and in this case, we're gonna make it black, okay? Now you'll notice that in the output, nothing has changed, but, and the reason is that we're actually adding two things to the same here. We're adding the style point here, and the style point here is the same. We're going to go ahead and get rid of this style in a second here. So we got color orange, background color black. We need font family, which is, you just type in font family. And of course, it's Courier. And the last one is font size, okay? And what do we have? We have 50 pixels. So what I've done here is I've taken all the style points out of HTML and I've put them into the CSS file. Now, if I get rid of this here, for example, if I get rid of the style point stuff in here, nothing changes. However, we can go play around with this to see if it works. So if we type in maroon like this, you can see that it does change. And you can see that it does, in fact, work. Okay, so we can go Arial, and you can see that it does, in fact, work. There we go. Sounds kind of cool, and it looks kind of neat as well. And we'll just put this up here so that it fits on one line. Okay, so let's do the exact same thing for the paragraph tag. So just to recap, we type in the tag, so in this case it's the P or paragraph tag. We need that curly brace because everything within that curly brace is going to affect this paragraph tag. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to go color blue. And by the way, depending on where you are in the world, I believe other spellings do work in certain areas of CSS. So if you want to spell color with a U, you're more than welcome to. Okay. All right. So we got color blue. We need background color. And this background color is going to be orange. Okay. The next thing is the font family. And this font family is going to be Impact, which is one of my favorite fonts, by the way. And the font size, and you need the colon again. And remember, in this case, you need quotes, but in this case, you don't need that. So the font size is going to be 30 pixels. All right, or px. All right, now if I go ahead and get rid of this style property here, you see that nothing changes, and if we change this to something like red, it works, and then we change the background color to blue, you can see that also works as well. All right, so I'll just push Control Z or Command Z to undo that, and you can do that in JSBin if you want. So you can see that if you hop back in the video tutorial, you can see that there was a lot of style points. Now, that was only 3 or 4. There was actually only 4 different style points we had. There's a ton of more styling you can do, and imagine if you had to read that all in the HTML document. It would look fairly complicated. So by putting everything to the CSS document, it does is it actually makes it a lot easier to look. And you can see here that this is a lot easier to look at. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that. You can see that we have all our header 1 tags are going to look like this. You know, it's going to have these amount of properties to it. All the paragraph tags are going to have that attached to that as well. All right, and now JSBin, before we continue on to the next tutorial, the last thing that I need to talk about is the fact that when you actually go and make a website, you usually have to go into an editor and then call it up in the browser here. Usually you have to call the CSS files. There's a little line of code that says, you know, please call the CSS file. And that's all it is. But in this environment, it automatically does that for you. So one thing I do want to talk a little bit about is, again, you can have this all-in-one document here, and if you want to do that, you're more than welcome to, and there are certain points when you do need to do this. However, sometimes if you want to do small style changes, you can just add the style tag here. And what you can do is watch this. If I go ahead and cut everything out of the CSS file by pushing Control X or Command X, depending on if you're a Mac or a PC, you can see that none of the formatting is there. If I paste that in there, the formatting instantly comes back, and that's because, again, JSBin renders everything on the fly. But if I put it within the style points here, you see that the exact same thing happens. So you can have little parts of the of your file within style tags if you really want to. So within the style tags here, just like the curly braces, this area is a temporary CSS file. I mean, anything within here is CSS, and what, again, the CSS file does is it takes it and it puts it out into the actual it's the exact same thing, it just puts it in a different file. All right, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. You'll notice that if you add in any other H1 tags, so if I go here and I type in H1, all right, and I type in, fun, it will go ahead and it will add that in there. All right, I'll go /H1, and what I'll do is I'll just get rid of this font size here so we can see everything. Yeah, there we go. So there we go. So we got anything that's H1, and if we added another paragraph tag, we can say, fun as well, and we'll go /P, and you'll see that the paragraph tag it works out like that. And if I added another paragraph tag, you can see that all of the style points affect that specific style tag. Now, what happens if you want to, let's say, have the second header one to have a different format than what you want so you want this header one to have a different format. Well, there's one thing you need to do is you can give this an ID. Okay, so much like the style property, you can give this an ID, and we're going to call this different. Okay, and so what this is we're going to format this H1 differently. And how do we do that? Well, we can just type in the hashtag or number sign, whatever you want to call it, and all you have to type in is different. And make sure you spell it correctly, because I spell things incorrectly all the time, and a lot of programmers do that. So again, you do need the curly braces here, and if you want this to be different, and again, H1, the ID tag is different, we can do something. For example, let's change the background color, and we'll give it maroon. Okay, and you can see that this one becomes maroon. Okay, now let's just go over how this works. So when you add something in CSS, it will apply it to every single style tag. So all the H1 tags throughout the entire document are going to be the same format. Again, with a paragraph tag or any other tag, by the way, you can add tables, unordered lists, whatever tag you want, will always be that style unless you change it. In this case, if you want to change it, you have to change it to a different ID. Now, usually the word different is not the ID you want to use. You want to say, second header, and you'll notice how I capitalize the second word. That just makes it look a little bit better. Most programming languages you do that, but if you go ahead and paste that in here, you can see that the second header works. So the way it works is that if you reference something specifically, in this case I'm referencing second header to do something different than the regular H1 tag. So this supersedes this, meaning that if you add in something to a specific ID, it will override anything that you put in here. Okay, and so that's essentially how it works. Now you can have 100 IDs if you really want to. In fact, as your programs get bigger, you have to add in more text. So by adding in that ID, what ends up happening is you can customize whatever you want. And so if you wanted to do it for, let's say, this paragraph here, so let's just do this here. We'll give equals, and we'll say second paragraph. Just like this. Now, one tip I like to do is I like to copy whatever's in there, and then again you put the number sign, second paragraph. There we go. And let's give it something like font family Arial. Okay, and there you go. And then font size, you can add in anything you want here. 30 pixels. Yeah, there we go. You can see that it's now 30 pixels. But you notice that the original one is unaffected. Okay, and so that's how you add in an ID. Everyone, let's go ahead and let's delete everything here. And what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and put in header 1, and then the ID is going to be equal to header 1. All right, and I'm just going to type in a word here, and you'll see what I'm going to do in a second. What we're going to talk about in this tutorial are fonts. Now, fonts are actually quite important, and it's kind of an art in itself picking the right font. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second here. But let's go ahead and let's add in these headers here. I'm just going to close the CSS file for just a quick second, and I might as well close the output here. So what I'm going to do is h1 header 1 is going to be, I'm just going to type in fonts are cool. All right, and I'll go ahead and close that off. And what I'm going to do is just to save a little bit of time, I'm going to copy and paste. Now, whenever you copy and paste, in programming, you want to read through each code line by line. And the reason is that a lot of times when you copy and paste, what ends up happening is you end up making mistakes. And these mistakes can come out not as bugs that would crash the program, but bugs that don't make the program not work the way it's supposed to. And those are even harder to debug. Okay? So you want to go ahead, and if you copy and paste something, you want to read it line by line. It does save time if you do this. Okay, so what we need to do is you need to hop in the CSS file, and let's just go ahead, and you can see that fonts are cool, fonts are cool, fonts are cool. Okay, and if we go ahead and we type in header 1, and of course we need the 2 curly braces. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and put in header 2 and header 3. Now, if you go ahead and you do this, in a lot of other programming languages, this would crash the program, meaning that you can't have a command that does the exact same thing. So you can't reference the header 1 in 2 different places. CSS and HTML is a very programmer-friendly environment, meaning that you're not going to get some major errors. But if you were to code something in like C++ or C#, that would definitely throw up an exception. JavaScript is also much easier, and it kind of just mashes everything together. All right, so there are 3 different kinds of fonts here when it comes to the CSS and web design. So let's go ahead and let's type in font family, and the current one is Times New Roman. Let's just go ahead and let's just type in something, Courier, and a semicolon. Okay, you can see that fonts are cool has now changed. Okay, and I'm just going to copy this over into the corresponding headers, and you can see that they all change, and this all works, and it's wonderful. Okay, I'm going to close the HTML here because we don't need it. All right, now watch what happens is I'm going to set this up as a serif font. Okay, and I'm also going to put this up as a sans serif or sans serif, depending on where you are. All right, and the last one I'm going to do is I'm going to do mono space. Okay, and you can see that in this case these fonts are the same here, but for the most part, if you really want to, you can go ahead and capitalize this, and you want to make sure that it is serif like that. And so you can see that here are the 3 different kinds of fonts. Now let's take a small bit of time to look at each one of these here. So you see that it says fonts are cool, fonts are cool and fonts are cool. So for the most part, you can see that the serif fonts have little lines at the end of each of the extensions here. And this will vary from font to font, but let's just take a look at the F of all three fonts here. So the first font has little lines at the end of it, but the second font doesn't, okay? You can see that the main difference is that the first one has these and the second one does not. Now, the monospace one means that all characters have the same width, okay? And you'll notice that in the first one, it's not quite the same. You know, the T is a little bit less than the S, but in the monospace, the T is the exact same width as the F. So monospace fonts are really good for if you want blocky type fonts, okay? So, so if you want blocky fonts, fonts that look very, very even, serif fonts look more elegant, and sans serif fonts look more modern. That's essentially what it is. And if you're really into fonts, fonts are actually, they have this whole kind of backstory to them. You know, which fonts were used in what newspapers, which books, and which time periods. It's actually quite a bit of fun, and it's very nerdy if you want to get into it. So these are the three different kinds of fonts in web space. And if you really want to, you can go ahead and find out which fonts work with each family. Before we move on from fonts, there's a couple things that we need to do. So we need to type in font style, and with any one of these font kind of properties here, you can say normal. All right. You can also go italic, and you can see that the font instantly changed to italic, and then we have oblique, which is pretty much the same as italic. Now, the other thing you can do is font weight, which is pretty simple. We always have the normal, and you'll see that if I type in normal here, okay, you see that it does change, and the reason is that header ones are usually bold, okay, and if I type in bold here, nothing really changes. It's because by default headers are bold. And you can also give it, you know, a number like 200, okay, 100. You can give it 500. Okay, you can give it 1,000. You can give it 2,000, etc. There's a number that if you really want to, you can give it as well. All right, and so there's font weight, and then there is font style, if you want to go ahead and add those in there. So you can actually go ahead and you can change the color of these fonts. Now, we already know how to do that. We can say color, and then you can give in a specific color. So in this case, we'll give it blue. But there are two other kinds of colors that you can use, okay? So the first thing you can use is you can use a hex code. And what a hex code looks like is you put in the hashtag there, and then you give it a color like, you know, 0FF, like this. All right, and you can see that the font changes, and then if you change this, you know, to like something like that, it does change up, you know, quite a bit. You know, you can give it more. You can use the colors to your advantage. Now, one tip that I like to give people, especially beginner designers, is that you don't want to use the default whenever possible, with maybe the exception of orange, because orange there isn't too many options. But instead of giving a red color, right, like this. That looks way too stock, and if you go ahead and you change it up a bit, it looks a lot better. So the other way you can do that is you can give it an RGB value, and that is a red, green, blue. So if you go RGB, and then you have to put in two brackets like this, and what you do is you can, let's say, give it a number between 0 and 255. So let's just do 33, 33, and 33, okay? And what ends up happening is if you go, let's say, you know, 255, you know, 33, 33, and you can go 255 here. But if you take this down to 250, you can see that it changes a bit, or you can change it down to 100. that changes a bit. And then if you give this up to, I don't know, let's say 100, you can see that it changes ever so slightly. And if we give this down to, let's say, 200, you can see that the color does change. So what do I like to do? I like to use the RGB values just because you can go ahead and play around with everything up there. The hex values do work, but they're a little bit obscure. So when it comes to color, again, you don't want to use the stock colors because they're kind of old and they're kind of boring. Now, of course, if you use 0, 0, and 0, that's black. And if you go 255 by 255 by 255, that's white. Now, whenever you're using black and white, again, another tip is to use an off-white or an off-black, meaning that if you change this down to, let's say, 240 a piece, right? 240, 240, and you might not be able to see this, but it is, in fact, not white. So you can kind of see it's a gray there, okay? And actually, let's just to highlight this, background color, and I'm going to go gray, okay? And both spellings of gray are work. So you can see that this here is an off-white. It's not exactly a white. And if I go back to 255, and by the way, if you add in another number there, the program will crash. So if you add in an off-white, it does look a little bit better. In fact, I do so a lot. And if you look at the course material, the heading, so for example, the Learn CSS in 1 hour, I use off-whites. I don't use actually any whites. The other thing you can do is you can also do an off-black. Now, again, it doesn't need to be far off black, but this is probably one of the best tips that I was ever taught. And if you go 10, I'll maybe give something a little more noticeable. But even if you do 10, 10, 10, that is a lot better than 0, 0, 0. So you can see that this is an off-black. That's a bit too much. So like even 20 is actually pretty good. So 20, 20, and 20. You can see that that is an off-black, and it's actually quite different. And if I get rid of the background color, you can see that there is a difference between these two. It's very subtle, but it is there. And those little subtleties when it comes to designing are actually really important, okay? Okay, so even if you wanted to do 50, 50, and 50, all right, you can see that that's even more gray. So that's a bit too much. But if you take a slightly off black or an off white, it does end up working out. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this here, and I'm going to show you another way that you can use some CSS and edit it a little bit differently. Okay, so I'm also going to delete all these headers here, and for this tutorial I'm going to go ahead and add in a link. So I'll close off the CSS, and we'll add in a link, and that's AHEREF equals 2 quotes. Now I have to go to a website that I haven't been to, so I'll go to something like that, and then we can say like that, and of course you need to close off that as well. Okay, so as you can see here, there's a couple of things. It's right now it's blue, and that's the default. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this and pull up the CSS here. Now, one thing you can do is if you type in A, and remember the link tag is technically an A tag. Okay, so if you type in A colon, right, and then we're going to go to type in link, what this will do is that this will format the link in any way, shape, or form. And so, for example, we can go font, family, and courier. Okay, and you can see that it changes to courier. One thing that I like to do is I like to change the color. So what we can do is you can go to color, and then we can go RGB, and then again we can do something like 50, 50, and 50, just like that, and close that off here. And you can see that that is the default default color here. Or what you can do is you can make it something like orange if you want. Perfect. Okay. Now you go ahead and put the semicolon and then the curly bracket, and you're thinking, wait a minute, what just happened here? Why aren't the curly brackets in a different way? So we've normally seen the curly brackets, we've normally seen CSS to look like this. Now remember, this looks exactly the same as this, right? They're exactly the same. Remember, the white spaces aren't exactly that important, meaning that the computer kind of reads them as nothing, okay? And so you can see this A link is orange. We can change it to whatever we want. Another thing we can do is we can change, we can add on another property to this. So watch this. We can go A, hover, okay? And then all we need to do is put in 2 curly brackets, and then we'll go to, let's change the font family for this, and we'll go to Courier, okay? And so what this does is that when you hover it over, you can see that the font changes here. And you can see that Courier is a monospace, and this actually highlights that quite effectively. So if you see that here, remember, monospace fonts, each of the characters have the exact same width. And in this case, this is a serif font. All of the characters do not have the same width, right? And again, we haven't changed the size here. You can just see the difference here, okay? Now, you can also change the active. So what this means is that when you click on it, it will make a certain property here. And let's do font size, and we'll make it 50 pixels, okay? And I'm just going to go ahead and add in the last one here, and we're going to go to A visited, okay? And that means, you know, if you visited before, and let's make it something like font family impact, okay? So I haven't been to CNN.com, so you can see that this, as soon as you click on it, it changes to size 50, right? That's actually kind of cool. In fact, I think that's really cool. So it changes to size 50, and then if we click on this, right, you know, it goes to CNN, and then once I go back to it, you know, if I just go to this here, you can see that the font family, you know, etc., can change. Okay, so that's essentially what it is, and that's how another way to use CSS. I'm going to go ahead and delete this right here, and I'm going to go ahead and delete this right here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up a table, and I'm going to show you some CSS elements and tables. And so in order to put a table, we're going to go border equals 1. All right, and you need to go /table. It's pretty simple here. Now, of course, you need tr tag. Table row. You need the slash in there as well, and you also need a table data tag. And we'll just type in item. All right, and we'll go /td. Perfect. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it a few more times. All right, and just for fun, I'm going to copy and paste this so we now have 2 rows. All right, so there we go. We have a nice little table here. I'll close off the HTML, and then I'll hop over to the CSS here, okay? So, first of all, let's take a look at this. So we do have a table tag, and there is a way to actually call in more objects here, which I'll show you in just a second. But let's go ahead and let's make the background color, and we'll make it orange, okay? You see that the background color for the entire thing makes everything work. All right, now if you wanted to, watch this. If I go into TD here, meaning the table data tag, and of course you need the curly brackets, and watch this. If I go background color, and we might as well make it something, let's say blue, okay? You can see that the table background is now blue, or the table background's orange, and then the table data is blue. Now let's hop over to the HTML here. There is one other type of tag we can have in here, and that's simply a table header, and we'll just put item in here as well, okay? And we'll close off the table header, and we'll copy this 4 times just to even things out a bit. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, simple enough. Now, again, hopping over to the CSS here, we can go, and if we wanted to, we can change the table data to color, and watch this, orange. Okay, and there we go. All of a sudden, we have orange now. Now you'll notice that if we wanted to, let's change this to red. Okay, and you're going to see what I'm going to do here. Now watch this. Now, by the way, if your table, if your CSS looks like this or this, it doesn't really matter. But watch what happens when I put in a comma, right? And then I put in a th. You see that the red, the table header, now has the properties of the table data. So you can do that now. You can actually add in another any other tag really. So if we hop to the bottom of this table and we add in, let's say, a paragraph tag and say this is a paragraph, and we go /p, simple enough. All right, and we'll go to p, and if we go ahead and type in p, you'll see that the exact same properties are attached to that p tag as well. Now again, what would happen if we wanted the background color of th to be different? So if I type in th, again, you're probably thinking, what's happening here? I'm already calling it here. But watch what happens. If I type in background color, and I want this to be black, you can see that it turns out to be black. Okay? So again, if you call something, for example, here we're calling the tag th, which is table header, which is the top row, of course. If you call something by itself, it supersedes anything before that. So if we get rid of this, for example, by pushing Control X or Command X, you can see that this is the default now, right? In fact, this is the default, and then this supersedes this, and then this supersedes this for th, right? So if I get rid of this, right, you can see that this turns black, but these turn orange, because that's what it's asking you to do. So for the most part, you can actually go ahead and you can change, put in different tags. You can combine tags as much as you want. So before I move on from tables, I want to go ahead and I want to delete this border here. So as you can see, the table border doesn't, well, it doesn't appear anymore. But you can put that border here within the table tag. However, you do have to change things up a little bit. This one isn't as self-explanatory. So what you want to do is you want to type in border, and then you have to type in one, in this case, pixel, and you have to type in something like solid black, okay? And you can see that it works out, but if you go ahead and put 12, you can see that the border is now 12 pixels. You can also type in dashed, right? And what it will do is it will change the pixels. So if I change this to 6 here, you can see that you can change it from solid to dashed if you want. Now, watch this. If I go ahead and put this in the table header, you see something similar, and let's just give it a cool color like maroon. Okay, and you can see the same thing happen, and you can change up anything you want here. So if you want to give borders around specific table items, you're more than welcome to, right? So essentially, that's what you need to do. There is another option. Let's say you want to border around this one right here. Let's hop into our HTML here, and I'm just going to change the letter that we want to do here. So I'm going to say changed, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to change an item just around this one here. What we need to do is we need to give it an ID, and we're going to just make the ID equal to changed, okay? So the ID is equal to changed, and I'll just make the exact one changed. So we're going to make changed a little bit different here. All right, and I can go ahead and I want it to be in the middle there. There we go. Okay. So now that we have ID changed, remember we can go into the CSS here, and if we type in hashtag changed, right, we can go ahead and give it something cool. And we can just type in border, you know, let's give it like 10. We'll make it really big. 10 pixels, solid. All right, in this case it's red. Let's make it solid yellow. Okay, there we go. So remember, each one of these tags here can be assigned an ID at any time, and you can go ahead and change anything within the CSS here. So if you need to change, for example, one of these table cells, you just have to find the corresponding tag, and you give it a unique ID. You don't want to give the, usually when you're doing this, you don't want to give the same ID to multiple tags. You want to make them different. But in this case, all we needed to do is just put changed in there. Okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this table here. And it's pretty simple. I'm just going to go delete everything. And just push delete there. And I'll delete everything in here as well. Okay, so one thing we will do is we will put in an unordered list. Okay. Right. And you'll of course need list items. So I'll just put an item. Alright, and you need to close that off. And I'll give maybe 3. There we go. And I'm going to copy this unordered list here, and I'm going to make this an ordered list. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is, first of all, I'm going to take in the unordered list, and I'm going to go ahead and we can actually change the way this works and the way this looks here. And all you have to do is type in list style type. Okay. Give it a colon, and in this case it's circle, but you can actually make it a square. All right, and you can see that instantly they turn into squares. Now there's a whole bunch of different kinds of list items you can use, and I can show you, for example, one of my favorites here is katakana. Okay. Which is kind of cool. It's anyway, yeah. So it's kind of cool here. You can also do decimal. All right. Now decimal, for the most part, is exactly the same as an ordered list. Now you're probably wondering, why would anyone do that? Well, it's again in the back end, the decimal is the same as the ordered list, and that's one way that that HTML and CSS kind of just jam things together. Okay. And you can do it Georgian. There's a whole bunch of these cool ones. One thing you can do is for the ordered list here. Now watch this. If I go to the ordered list, and I'm just going to go ahead and give this a square. If I go to the ordered list, and again I use the list style type. Okay. In this case, I'm going to go upper Roman. Okay, and guess what? Now we have Roman numerals. And I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to copy the list item. There we go. Okay, and you can see that it goes all the way up, and it's actually kind of cool when you think about it. All right, and so that's essentially what you need to do for list items here. Now, one thing is in the HTML tutorial series, I showed you how to make lists within lists. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to make an ordered list. Okay. And I'm going to close off the tag ordered list. Now watch this. All right. And I'm going to go to list item. And I'm just going to type in item here. And I'm going to close off this tag. And I might as well go ahead and do this here. Okay. So as you can see, this item has a list in it, and it's the same ordered list. Now, again, within CSS here, any ordered list is going to be the exact same thing. So what if we wanted to make this ordered list different? We're going to call it just simply ID, and we're going to call it different. Okay, that's all you have to do. It's still the same, but if we go into our CSS here, and we type in the hashtag, and we type in different, okay, and of course you need the curly braces, and we go list type style, and actually it's list style type, and we give it something different, like lower Roman. You can see that it goes to lowercase Roman. We can do pretty much, you can go lower Latin, etc. You can see that you can change it up as much as you want. Now, there's one last thing I need to show you, and I wouldn't be doing my job, and this wouldn't be a CSS course if I didn't show you this, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a header 1, and we're going to make this an ID, of course, and we're just going to make it, this ID is going to be header 1, okay? We'll give it a name, like header, something like that, and then we'll close off the tag of header 1 like that. Okay, so we have header 1, and let's go ahead and let's add in let's add in actually a header 2, okay, and what we'll do is we'll type in header 2, all right, but this time we'll type in class equals, we're going to call this change, okay, and then we'll call this header 2, okay. Close this off, and the last thing we'll do is we'll add in a paragraph tag with the class of change as well, okay, and we'll call this paragraph, okay, and we'll close that off just like this. All right, perfect. I'm just going to go ahead and capitalize that. So now we have header 1 with an ID, and header 2 with a class, and the paragraph tag with a class. So if I hop over to my CSS here, we can type in hashtag header 1, and then we can give it a property like color orange, and font family courier. Okay, that makes perfect sense here. The one thing that I haven't shown you how to do is you can actually call in different tags with a name. So if you want to use the ID, it's one specific tag. If you use the class, it is more than one tag. So if I type in dot change, all right, and then I add in the exact same thing here, right, and I go, watch this, if I go to color and I'll go maroon, okay, you see that both of them change, okay, and the reason why is that, again, if you want to use a specific kind of tag or ID, you use the class, but if you only want to change one tag, you use the ID, okay? So again, we can change this to anything, font, family, impact, all right, and font size, and then we'll make it 40 px, and then they both equal the same, even though a header 2 is supposed to be a little bit bigger, okay? And so that's pretty much what I wanted to show you. You do use the class quite a bit, and I use the ID more often than not, just because you use that in JavaScript a little bit more. But if you want to go ahead, that's all you have to do is type in the dot change. Okay. So one thing that you can do is you can actually go and put in the body tag here, and you can watch this. You can do pretty much anything you want with the body tag, just like this, and we can make it red. Let's make it orange. Okay. Now, you'll sometimes see this up here where it says, you know, it won't be able to save. Don't worry about that, okay? You can change this and make it the font family. We'll make it Impact, just because I love that font. And you can make this, for example, you know, the font size. You can make it whatever you want, maybe like 40 pixels. Yeah, it's a bit too much, like 30 pixels, just like that. Okay, you can see how this all works here. So essentially that's what you can do with the body here. And remember, you can change any one of these here. You can change the H1, and then if you really want this to be color maroon, you know, you can see that it automatically changes like that if you really want to. All right. So for the most part, that does wrap up the tutorial series. I will give a conclusion. Now CSS, as you can see, I gave you the basics of what CSS is. You use this a lot in any kind of web programming, and for example, you can use this in some of Visual Studio because Microsoft is using a lot more HTML5 stuff, you know, JavaScript, etc. And you'll also find out that CSS is used in programs like Dreamweaver. All right. All right. That concludes the course, everybody. So I hope you've learned a lot about CSS. Again, this was an hour where I showed you all the basics, and you have a lot of the tools to go and play around with CSS. Now, one thing I highly recommend you do is just simply play around and, for the most part, sandbox you want to sandbox what you're doing here, meaning that you want to play around with the HTML, you want to play around with the CSS, you want to just essentially learn the skills through doing it. And I can't give you any better advice if you want to learn how to program, is to just do it a lot. In fact, the more you do it, the better you get. It's just that simple. It's like sports, music, anything like that. You're not going to become a good hockey player just by sitting around. You become a good hockey player by playing hockey. It's just that simple. All right. So thank you for taking the course, and I hope to see you in another course. Have a nice day.